And I think a lot of folks on the left think the best way that they can help people is to make decisions for them and to provide for them wherever they can, to give everyone a base income, to give everyone a base home, to give everyone health care. And so I think a lot of folks on the left believe this is the way to help people. But all of history shows us that doesn't help people, it degrades them. When you take away their ability to make their own decisions or their incentives to strive, it doesn't lift people up. They tend to deteriorate, and we see it throughout our society where we create an underclass who are dependent on government rather than aspiring to become more independent. And so for me, as I look at what the left is doing, if you look at the results or the real facts, it's anything but compassionate.
In the eyes of former US Senator Jim DeMint and Rachel Bovard, what is conservatism really? How has it been misrepresented? How is diversity actually a central feature of conservatism? Why is respect for transcendent moral order important to civil society? And how do progressive policies that sound compassionate actually end up hurting the people they seek to help? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Today we sit down with Rachel Bovard and Senator Jim DeMint. DeMint is the chairman of the Conservative Partnership Institute, and Rachel Bovard is the senior policy director there. The two co-authored the book, Conservative, Knowing What to Keep. Rachel Bovard, Senator Jim DeMint, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be with you.
So, a really fascinating book, Conservative, Knowing What to Keep. I've been thinking all along as I was reading, what is your impetus here? What's the reason behind writing this book?
Lots of reasons, but one is if you want to understand the insanity in Washington, the division, the complete chaos, the book Conservative can help folks understand that, because there really is a wedge in our nation driving the left from the right, and we want folks to understand what ideas are on either side. For us as conservatives, we just see it as the things we want to keep, the things that make life better. Much of that starts at the personal level. It's not all political. But there is a left in America today that has very different ideas of how the world works. And we've got pretty good data in the book that says their ideas do not work.
Rachel, what about you?
Well, I think there's a big misunderstanding of, or people who are unaware of what conservatives actually stand for. I think you have the left who's trying to define conservatives all as bigots and racists and all these terrible things. And then you have people on the right, I think, who are a little bit confused as well. And so this was our attempt to say, actually, conservatism has a long history of philosophies and ideas. And we've really tried to bring those forward, to really update them for the modern generation and this modern moment, which I think is, unprecedented a little bit for everybody.
Yeah, so you actually reference Russell Kirk, The Conservative Mind, obviously extensively in the book. I'm going to quote something you wrote, which I thought was very interesting. He said, "If we are to rescue the modern mind, we must do it very soon." And he said this in 1953. Where have things come since 1953? Where are we at?
Russell Kirk is considered the father of the conservative movement in America, and as Rachel says, we've tried to bring those ideas forward. Most of them will surprise people of what it really means to be a conservative. But since he said that, I think you have seen a kind of give and take of conservatives winning victories, like during the Reagan times, and then going back the other way. The pendulum has been swinging. But in a lot of ways, we've lost ground as the left has become more powerful. That's the urgency behind the book. Russell Kirk talks about we need to bring the young masters, the young people today, into the fold to help them understand why this idea of socialism is so crazy and why the things that work are called conservative.
So conservatism has been given a kind of a really bad rap. I think you even referenced the Wikipedia page. It kind of gives this negative feel, but you see it totally differently, don't you?
I do, and I really think it gets a bad rap as sort of a fusty, dated, ideology, but it's none of those things. It's very much a living tradition and much more of a philosophy of gratefulness than it is of anything else. And I think that's what we really try to talk about in the book. It's not this, reflexive series of policy prescriptions that the left gives us, this rigid ideology of things you must do. It's really a way of living and a way of appreciating the world. And it relies a lot on things that have been tried in the past. It gets a bad reputation of being an old, dated philosophy, but that's because I think it reflects on a lot of the wisdom that's been accumulated over the years. I mean, no one ever reinvents the wheel. Like, human nature doesn't really change that much. All these things have been tried before, and some have succeeded and some has failed. Conservatism simply says, what can we learn from that? Liberalism says, well, let's just burn everything down and start over. We can create utopia here on Earth. And conservatives say, no, we've seen that go wrong in the past. Let's take the things that have worked before, get rid of the things that haven't worked, and use that as our guide for moving forward.
It's very much like the business world. I spent about 25 years there before I fell into politics. It's what we call continuous quality improvement. You identify best practices and you keep making them better. That's a direct parallel with conservatism, is understanding what has worked in the past, using those principles to build a better future. It's not throwing everything out and starting over every day as if you had no knowledge of the past. That's what the left tends to do today, is want to throw everything out. In politics, it's the Constitution, the Declaration, trying to say that all of that is bigoted, written by old white men. We don't.
The nation's founding. They're trying to throw that out.
Very founding. And so the things that matter are due process. In Washington today, we're completely throwing those things out the window that were developed over years for a reason. So conservatism is taking the best of the past, identifying those things, and building a better future.
So, one thing that struck me as super interesting in the book is that you outline how conservatism is basically, diversity is something that's very inherent to conservatism and incredibly important in conservatism. And it kind of feels to me like diversity, when I think of it, I think of basically diversity in the office or something like that. It's almost like the term has been incredibly co-opted. Can you explain what you mean by that and the implications?
Yeah, I think it's something that would surprise people about conservatives, but it allows for incredibly diverse opportunities and views and differences. And what we mean by that is, I think the best way to do it is to compare it to socialism. Socialism is the great equalizer. Socialism says everybody's outcome must be the same or we're doing it wrong. But the trick is, it's very, very easy to make everyone equal when they're all equal down here. It's much, much harder to make people equal at the top. And conservatism simply says every person is different. Every person is born with different gifts and views and identities. And that's what we want to allow to flourish. And people should be allowed to pursue their gifts, whatever they are. Even though mine are different from yours, we create a system where everybody can flourish based on the gifts that they have. It's an equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome.
And the irony is, if you want to have a unified people, you've got to respect and celebrate the differences. Because America actually is the world. People have been coming here from all over the world for centuries now. And the way to bring them together is to respect their differences. Because you and I can live next to each other, have very different views, vote for different people, but as long as no one makes us be the same, we can enjoy our differences. That's the problem. That's the tension we have in Washington now, because they don't celebrate diversity on the left. They talk about diversity a lot, but they might be talking about skin color or something else. They're not talking about ideas. They're very intolerant of different beliefs. But in America, we need to celebrate those differences, the differences as individuals and communities at the state level. The problem we have is when we bring all power to Washington and begin to make one-size-fits-all decisions for everybody. Same schools, same health care, same ideas in universities. And then suddenly that creates a tension because people are different and they want to be different.
Another thing that just jumps to my mind actually is that you talk about this distinction you were talking about the left, but liberals and progressives in your mind are actually quite different approaches to the world, quite different mentalities. It almost struck me as if, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you feel like the progressive has kind of co-opted or play on the things that the liberals might rightfully seek to see make better. Am I reading this right?
Well, I think you really are seeing a push toward progressivism. You've had this tradition on the left, that's liberal tradition, which is, been a lot about civil rights or a lot about sort of this respectful dissent that's still patriotic, all these things. But you're really seeing progressives want to burn the entire system down. And that, I think, is a different view than we've seen recently from the left. So there is a push in that direction that I think is new and unprecedented.
The left has gone well beyond allowing people to have different sexual preferences, to insisting that you agree with their views. And if you don't, you're intolerant or hateful. The difference on the conservative side is the tolerance of people doing lots of different things, believing different lifestyles, but not forcing it on everyone else. And different people are going to think things are right or wrong, and we need to allow that. And the federal government doesn't need to come in and try to conform everyone to a set of beliefs. That's what's dividing America right now, is if you can get 51% of the vote or the Electoral College, you can start directing people's lives all over the country. Americans don't like that, and they're pushing back. Conservatism is a totally different view that respects and celebrates real diversity.
One of the things that struck me, again, to this point, is it's almost like the way freedom is conceived by people on the progressive side versus conservatives is very different. Mm-hmm. I think I saw you said that on one hand, freedom is this birthright. Conservatives view freedom as the birthright for every American. On the left seems to be fighting against that freedom, but I think folks on the left actually are imagining that they want to have freedom for everybody. I think most people that I know that would be on that side would say that.
Yeah, I think you can frame it, I think, in those terms, but I think the difference is something that Senator DeMint said, which is that to progressives, they want freedom that looks exactly how they define it, right? It's sort of this idea of unity, right? They're creating unity by putting us all into tiny groups that hate each other, and that's not unity. That's in tearing the country apart.
So identity politics, you're talking about?
Is identity politics, right? And to them, freedom, they say, well, this group cannot be truly free unless this group is subject to them. Or, and that's not, the true definition of freedom as the founders saw it, which is, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for each individual as they define it. And that really gets to the root, I think, of how much influence the government has in your life. Because again, the right says everyone should pursue those ends equally. And the left says the government is going to mandate it for you. And both of those things cannot be true. And I think the more we see the government get involved and try to mandate freedom for everyone and what it looks like, the more we actually see everyone living in a way that is a lot less free.
And the left emphasizes freedom from responsibility. On the conservative side, it's freedom to do the right thing, freedom to do the things that you must. It's not licensed to do anything you want. And the left has been pretty good at telling people that what we mean by freedom is that you're on your own. No one's going to help you. And all of these groups are out there trying to take advantage of you. And they keep playing to a central power to be the referee and the protector. So that's why they divide us all into groups and foment mistrust, is they're making a case that you need this central power in Washington to protect you from all these others.
Conservatism is often associated or framed as if it should be associated with Christianity. But you're saying that's not necessarily the case, even though there needs to be some kind of, higher power involved. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Russell Kirk talked about one of his planks in his conservative platform is a belief in a transcendent order.
Yes.
As we saw with our founders, we say, were they Christians or deists or agnostic? They were very different things. But they all had a respect for this idea of a transcendent order, because that's what they believed would allow people to be governable, is if they felt there was an accountability to a higher power outside themselves, and importantly, a higher power than the government. So while it's not conservatism is not saying you have to believe this or that you even have to believe in a transcendent order, but that pervasive respect for the existence of a permanent moral order, as Russell Kirk said tends to create civility and unity when everyone is focused on something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's something that would surprise people about conservatism because the left loves to conflate conservatives with theocrats, and that's not at all.
Absolutely.
I think what conservatism is about, it's about, to Senator DeMint's point, a belief in a transcendent moral order, and that's not what the left wants. The left very much wants to stamp out religious faith of all kinds. They have a religion of atheism to some extent. No one should have belief that the public square should be entirely stripped of anything that smacks of religion. And conservatives say, no, let that flourish, because religious people make better communities, they make better families, they're generally happier, and they don't abuse substances. Like, these things are all empirically true. And so religion, it makes for better citizens, I think, would be the way that Russell Kirk would frame it now.
Yeah, and I think you might have a neighborhood with people with all denominations and atheists or what, but the point is to respect each other's differences. Here it goes back to the differences, but the fact that there is a pervasive belief that there's something bigger than ourselves it creates a governable people. Our founders all said that our Constitution and our way of life, the freedoms that we respect, would not work for unless you had a moral and religious people. But that does not mean the government should push religion in any way, but the government should be the one to allow it to flourish and not to push it out of the public square. So it's a hard thing for folks to understand, because particularly if you're in office, as I've been, if you mention religion, they somehow think you want the government to have a role and to tell people what to believe. That's not it at all. The government needs to stay out of it and allow it to flourish, allow differences to prevail and be respected. That's what creates a real unity of spirit in a country without forcing everyone to be the same.
So do you feel that one of the, I guess, ills of society today is that that moral people has become degraded, or the morality has disappeared?
I do think it's a big problem when we talk about creating civil society. I think it's why so many people want to rely on the government, because the things that religious people have that I think make better communities and make better families, those values aren't there anymore. And it does, I think, put this push toward having the government be your God, have the government take care of you. And Edmund Burke, who we reference a little bit in this book, talks about that as well. He talks about this idea of the little platoons, which are our communities that take care of one another, our institutions, which include our churches and our schools, and our synagogues and our local YMCA. All these things go into making good, solid citizens and people. And without, I think, a citizenry focused on those kind of values, all you look toward is the government. And the government, at the end of the day, as we talk about endlessly in this book, does not have the ability to solve all these problems, which reach so far beyond the aspects of government.
If you think about it, laws tend to punish folks for the very worst behavior. But a moral values, traditional values, religious values tend to drive people upwards to do the very best they can, to do the good things. And law doesn't tell you to do those things. That's why the transcendent idea is so different than just a country that's based on laws. Because those laws are just to catch the very worst things that we do. But what inspires us to be our very best, it goes back to that transcendent moral order that Kirk was talking about.
To this point around morality, you talk about, I think you have a statistic in here where Americans say that family is the number one thing by a large margin in their lives, and then faith is, I think, the second position. What do you make of this, I think by most standards, this kind of destruction of the traditional family in American society?
I think it's been difficult, to sustain the communities, to sustain the mediating institutions when what they're all replicated on, which is the family, has sort of gone by the wayside. And so, that the government, again, can't solve those problems. It can allow for strong families. It can create the conditions for strong families to thrive, but it can't go in and tweak this and tweak that, and out comes the perfect family. So it's really incumbent upon government to get out of the way and remove the disincentives for strong families if we're going to solve that problem.
The disincentives is what we should talk about from a political standpoint, because the U.S. has implemented a number of policies that discourage marriage, encourage childbirth outside of marriage, and through our welfare systems, a person can lose a lot of money and benefits if they get married. And it just shouldn't be that way. And we've encouraged a lot of alternative lifestyles. The government shouldn't be a part of that either. But the society itself can do what it wants to do, and that kind of freedom is something conservatives support. But when we start discouraging family formation, particularly with the data we have of what it does to create opportunities for people, and when people go the other way, the statistics are just against them. The chances of having a positive, prosperous life go way down. So these traditions of family formation and get married before you have children, that may seem old-fashioned, but in fact the statistics are very clear that that is your best chance to have a better life. That doesn't mean we want government to punish anyone else, but let's at least know what those traditions are and respect them, and allow people to take the traditional route without being stigmatized.
So some people have argued that these types of policies were kind of deliberate to break down the family. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think to Senator DeMint's point, if there has been a degradation, it's been because the government has decided to prioritize certain lifestyles over others, And I think to his point, you don't want the government to be doing any of that social engineering.
Okay.
We want the government to create the incentives for people to make the choices they want, but ultimately to create, the ability to have a strong family. And right now we don't have that situation. It's disincentivized financially for folks who want to get married or have a lot of children. And that's not necessarily something that is helpful, I think, to building the strong communities that we know are the building blocks of a strong society.
To your question of is it by design? Does the left really want to destroy the family structure or traditional ideas? It's hard to tell. I'm afraid maybe I do get a little conspiratorial after being in the middle of it for a number of years, but it's clear not only here but in other countries where there's a push towards socialism, there is a push to remove any other central authority. And that can be the family, that can be the church, that can be smaller communities, and certainly it's religion. If you look at the tyrants of history, one of the first things they try to do is to push religion out so that the government becomes the only master. It's the only thing you can look to. And that seems too designed for me to believe sometimes, even of the left. But it does seem, if you follow their policies, that the goal is to destroy all of those other, not only the little platoons, but the different authorities that we might have in our families, from our parents to our priests or pastors. All of those are diminished, and then you see, as you see in our news, the only thing that matters in America, if you look at our news, is politics and what's going on in Washington. And it's just not true. That's a small part of most people's lives.
Yeah. Well, to your point, if you trace back to the forefathers of progressivism, specifically to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he does say, if you're going to actually create a strong child, remove him from the bonds of his father. And he said, let the state develop him in a very sort of neutral, state-focused way. So I don't know,
That just seems evil, and so it's hard for me to accept. But it does seem, if you go back to the whole history, that it's just woven in to take away all of those non-government authorities in our lives and replace it with a central authority.
Progressivism is obviously a major topic that you cover in here because it's quite misunderstood, not even just by conservatives, but I think at society at large. I think you argue that. Can you kind of give me a breakdown of what, in your view, progressivism is actually all about? What is it? What are the fundamentals?
I'll let you start, Rachel.
Well, we might actually have two different perspectives on this because we come from two different generations that I think have experienced progressivism.
I'd love to hear both.
Yeah, and he's obviously been in the mix and in the arena dealing with it. I think from my perspective, how I would describe it right now is progressivism is the attempt to use the means of the state to create an environment in the image of a progressive person, right? They think the state is a tool to sort of browbeat everyone into what they think freedom looks like or what their point of view is. And that's a very serious thing, and it's can be very destructive.
You mentioned social engineering earlier, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're seeing that now from a lot of our sort of progressive members of Congress and our progressive candidates, they want to create America in their own vision, and they have no time and bear no torch for anyone who thinks differently. And that to me is a very nefarious way to look at the policy making. It should not be to conform. It should be to allow things to flourish.
A big part of our book is trying to understand what are the motives of the left. A lot of times we talk about their policies and the bad things that we think they do, but why would anyone want to do that? And so to look at the motives, you have to ascribe some genuine compassion. How do they think they're helping people? And I think a lot of them do, but they believe as they look out, and most of the leftists have a high platform in politics or university or entertainment. They're looking out on the great unwashed masses. And as I was talking to a Democrat who read my book, and she was just saying, I disagree with the fact that people can make their own choices. And she was very revealing, in what I already knew is that there are a lot of poor single parents out there who could not choose the best schools for their children. And I think a lot of folks on the left think the best way that they can help people is to make decisions for them and to provide for them wherever they can, to give everyone a base income, to give everyone a base home, to give everyone health care. And so I think a lot of folks on the left believe this is the way to help people. But all of history shows us that doesn't help people, it degrades them. When you take away their ability to make their own decisions or their incentives to strive, it doesn't lift people up. They tend to deteriorate, and we see it throughout our society where we create an underclass who are dependent on government rather than aspiring to become more independent. And so for me, as I look at what the left is doing, if you look at the results or the real facts, it's anything but compassionate. They create snares for them that keep them down. But there's an elitist mindset on the left that really believes that the only way to help people is to do it for them. And you can ascribe good motives to that, but I think a lot of folks on the left, I shouldn't say a lot, but the financiers on the left believe that this meme, that this is the only way to help people and create quality, is the way to create central power on this globe, not just in America, but through the United Nations and other supranational groups like the European Union. That's why you see so many people that are upset of Britain coming out of that. It's going the wrong way for the left. They want the consolidation. And it just goes back to an elitist idea that the best way to create order and peace and equality is to have a few people control everything.
It's really kind of interesting. In your book, you highlight how a conservative principle is that humans are flawed fundamentally. Right? And then that there's a kind of reality that flows from that. Yet it seems like this perspective that you just described suggests that many humans aren't even capable of making good decisions for themselves. And there's a deep irony in this to me. Am I?
No, I mean, there is, right? And I think part of being a free person is acknowledging, that mistakes may happen, that you may have to overcome. Conservatives say that part of the struggle is what makes life meaningful, right? Because you can't fully appreciate anything later unless you've really kind of gone through it. And liberals say the struggle should never exist. That shouldn't be part of the human or American experience. So that's sort of an existential look at the answer to your question. But I think from a broader perspective, conservatives recognize that human nature is fundamentally flawed beyond our ability to fix it with the government. And I think that informs how we approach policy. Policy is never going to fix human nature. You have to account for the fact that humans are going to fail. And that's why we say big government run by fallible humans is not necessarily the answer. The left looks at human nature as perfectible. They think that they can just put enough people in the government, make the government big enough, and it'll fix all of the problems, not recognizing that government run by humans is inherently going to fail at some point.
It's an important thing for people to understand because it's an important differentiation from the left to the right. The left does believe, as Rachel says, that people are perfectible and all our flaws are based on the environment. So it's up to the government to change the environment so that everyone can achieve their potential. But if you look at the founders of this country, you could tell that everything they did in the Constitution, they had in mind that the human beings were flawed, that power corrupts, and that they needed to keep power out of the hands of a few. So they divided the federal government into 3 branches. They gave the states a lot of power, and everything was designed to keep one person from having the levers of power because they knew of our faults. But if you take a look at the big picture, if we are all humans, we're flawed, but we aspire to great things, we're capable of very low things. The idea of a transcendent order, of us being accountable to something that's bigger, more moral than we are, is a way to help flawed folks become governable, and also to flawed people to achieve and aspire to something better. And so while there seems to be an irony between the idea of we want flawed people to be free, in reality it actually works better when people make decisions and they can get the rewards or the consequences of those decisions. As they go through life, they become better and better decision makers. And those who are really good at it are the ones that tend to prosper. If you believe that everyone is, in a sense, perfect, but all of the flaws and inequalities come from the environment, then there's no other entity that can fix that except a central authority that tries to make everything the same and everything equal. Former Chief Justice Thurgood Marshall once said that equality is when everyone gets the same thing at the same place at the same time. That's equality to the left. That's tyranny to those of us on the right. When you're trying to force everyone into the same mold, you forget our differences, you forget everything about us that makes us human.
I think it goes back to, I think it was Madison that said in the Federalist Papers, if men were angels, we wouldn't need all these things. If men were angels, they're not. Women aren't either, by the way. But we need these mediating institutions. We need our separation of powers and our checks and balances to account for the fact that power concentrated in the hands of a few is going to be misused. That is something history teaches us. It's something religion teaches us. It's something every area of our culture has made plain. And so that's why we do it.
There's something really incredible about this American founding and this how all these different pieces of governance came together to create this system of checks and balances. You guys are seasoned pros at knowing about this. I'm just a novice learning, right? As a Canadian, right? I didn't realize a lot of this. What would you say is the kind of most important piece of this amazing tapestry that forms the government structure and philosophy?
It's hard to bring it down to one thing, but I think as we research for a book like this, if we look at our founding, I believe that the highest level of human existence is what we call freedom. When people can make their own choices about the things that they want, the things that they value, the things that they want to keep in their lives, if we as a people and as a government can do everything we can to enhance those choices and opportunities, that's what our primary goal should be. Is not make decisions for people, but make sure they have a lot of choices and that they are capable, and this part of our education system and our family structure is you raise people to be capable of making their own decisions so that they can live their lives in freedom. And so the left would try to make that sound like, well, again, you're on your own, it's very insecure, anything could happen, you need people to take care of you. Certainly we need safety nets, but most of those should come from family, community, and states before it comes to a central authority. But for me, it's the word freedom that we're working for.
I think when it comes to the work that we did here, it comes back to the very aptly title that we chose, essentially, which is conservative, knowing what to keep. And it really goes back to what Russell Kirk said, and he exhorted every single generation to remind the next generation of what it is that's important to hold on to, because when we start to lose our memory, we start to lose who we are. And so much of conservatism is just about remembering what worked and what didn't, and what our forefathers have learned and taught us and gone before. Edmund Burke said we stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's really what we're trying to do here with conservatism when we are re-articulating it, is simply to say this is the collective wisdom, the accumulated wisdom of our forefathers. There's probably some good stuff in there. Maybe we should pay attention.
So, last question, because we're going to have to finish up in a moment, but a lot of our viewers are very, very concerned. I'm very concerned with some of these polls that have been outward telling us that young people, your generation and younger, Rachel, that are, essentially believing that socialism is a good idea. Many even saying communism is a good idea. They're wearing Che Guevara t-shirts, all this kind of stuff. So what is the prescription? Of course, we want to get at this, we want to teach the memory of the past, but what can someone do that's watching this show right now to turn the tide, or is this a concern?
Well, I think from my perspective, there's a couple of reasons millennials are turning to socialism. And one, I think, is they don't understand at all what it really is. And the polls actually bear this out. Socialism is actually the largest man-made creator of human death and misery on the planet. And I think that hasn't been well articulated. But I think also, the right hasn't done a great job of articulating what a free market is and why it benefits us. I mean, this is a generation that grew up watching the bailouts, of 2008 and 2009, where Wall Street was saved and individual pensions and savings were not. They've done a great job of allowing crony capitalism to flourish and not, presenting what a free market is and how good it can be. So I think there's an equal opportunity blame here. And so, the left, it has its own problems, but so does the right, and they need to do a better job of creating a free market.
Probably a lot of university students today would be afraid to stand up in class and say, I believe in capitalism. It's been so stigmatized, and partly because what most of them have seen is a version of crony capitalism. But the truth is that capitalism has pulled more people out of poverty than all the government programs in the world put together. And we've seen that. We outline it in our book. You see the gross domestic product of the whole world basically being flat for centuries, with over 90% of the people being subsistent farmers, dirt poor. It's only when capitalism began to create that trading between individuals, between companies, and the gross domestic product went straight up. And a lot of folks have been pulled out of poverty. It's not perfect yet. And that's what the left uses to denigrate it, that, okay, some people have been left behind, so let's throw it out and replace it with the worst form of the worst economic system that mankind has ever envisioned. But because we don't teach it well, and because, as Rachel says, Republicans, conservatives, and others don't defend it well, a lot of young people feel like it's much safer to say, I believe in socialism, because it sounds like social media or something that's better than capitalism.
Okay, aside from your book, conservative, where else can they look right now to know what to do? Where can they, is there a website? Is there a...
Yeah, you can find us and the work that we do online at conservativepartnership.org, and there we outline sort of our vision for strengthening, equipping, and unifying the conservative movement here on Capitol Hill, and really taking a lot of these ideas from theory to practice.
Wonderful. Well, it's such a pleasure to have you, Senator Jim
Well,
DeMint.
thank you. Enjoyed it very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.